Hey guys, it's Anna and Moriah, and we're here at the University of Chicago to ask students what they wrote their supplemental essays about.
If you want to learn what your chance of admission is to the University of Chicago, check out our chancing engine here.
What if the moon were made of cheese? And what's so easy about pie? These are some of the questions students applying to the University of Chicago could be tasked to answer. Located in Hyde Park, UChicago is a rigorous research university with a 6% acceptance rate. We at College Mind were curious about how applicants have responded to UChicago's famous, infamous, unconventional prompts, so we traveled to campus to ask admitted students what they wrote their UChicago supplement essays about.
Which UChicago essay prompt did you answer, and how did you answer it?
So I answered the question. They said there's been a mistake in the registrar. Some letter of a class has been changed. What's this new class? And not only what is this class, tell me about this class. And so instead of art history, I did fart history, and I went on this long list of I delineated all of art history. Apparently Benjamin Franklin had written a letter on the history of flagellations or something like that. I think it was a class oriented thing, right? How farts are looked down upon by higher institutions, but used to kind of as this tool to talk about class in general. Maybe I don't entirely remember, but I remember the main historical person I referenced was Ben Franklin.
So I kind of did a cop out and wrote my own prompt. I did this project in my advanced biology class in high school. I was trying to figure out a way for two people with vaginas to be able to have a baby on their own without the need of a sperm cell. So that was what I wrote my project on, and so that's what I wrote my essay on.
I'm obsessed.
Was that project. But basically my essay was about how my procedure wouldn't work, and bioethics, which is what I'm really interested in and what I came in wanting to focus on. And then I just also put in literally a portion of my stand-up bit about gay people. I don't know. I was just trying to be quirky enough for UChicago. And so my own question that I asked, it was something along the lines of why can't I have my own child with my future partner who probably won't have a penis? That was what my essay was on.
What kind of ethics did you get into in that essay?
Well, it's interesting because I'm now studying something a little bit different, but I was thinking about the reason why the field of science that studies fertility wouldn't be open to a procedure like the one I proposed. And it's partly because people are homophobic and misogynistic, but it's also partly because there's a lot of financial and business barriers and why people wouldn't want to pursue a project that's so out there. I think people even in the science world want to do something that's a little closer to what has worked in the past. And I think this whole field of fertility is still really new in terms of lesbian couples having kids, or I don't know, non-traditional families having children. It's not something that the world of science right now wants to invest in.
Hello. I think it was one that was if a hot dog could be considered a sandwich and if cereal could be considered a soup, basically create a blank could be considered a blank. And then I did sushi could be considered a burrito.
Can you elaborate more on how you tried to rationalize sushi being a burrito?
There's this restaurant called Sushi Rito, which kind of started that whole idea, but then I moved on to just a regular sushi roll. And I know when they create sushi, it starts looking like a burrito in the beginning, and they slice it into these different sections. And I was kind of thinking about how burritos filled with it's a filler food filled with different condiments inside and different proteins, whatever. And that's kind of what a sushi was like. And then I kind of went into the multiple different aspects, the physical, the social, a bunch of different implications from a sushi possibly being a type of burrito.
I wrote mine on what is 0 divisible by. So my argument is that 0 is divisible by 0, anything and nothing. And then I used the rule of infinity over dividing infinity by infinity, and how you don't know the extent of the infinity on the denominator, so therefore you can't necessarily say it's just 1, and just arguing that 0 is divisible by itself, by something, and by nothing, just to keep that argument alive. So yes.
And why did you choose that prompt?
I think it was because there was a Sally Sells She Sells by the Seashore one, and I was just quite confused for a bit, so I did not write that one. And then there was one you could look back at old prompts, and I was kind of lazy during that time because I had just filled out like so many applications, and I felt like I was doing Calc 2 at the time, and I really enjoyed Calc 2, and we had just learned about like part of that integrals were like, oh, infinity over infinity, what does that equal? And so I was just like, oh, okay, I can apply this to 0, and I just had so much fun about like comparing it to different things and writing about it.
I answered the who does Sally sell seashells to question. And like the second that I saw that question, I immediately thought like, okay, like, you know, I like economics, and I thought, you know, Sally sells seashells. The seashell market must be like a really open market. It's a purely competitive market for people in AP Econ. And so I immediately thought like, okay, well, if Sally is the only one selling seashells in a purely competitive market, then she has to be using some sort of, you know, threat of violence, or, you know, is getting some sort of government help. And I thought, well, Sally definitely is like a mafia. So I wrote about how Sally is actually a organized crime syndicate. And I started thinking like, okay, well, I started discussing that out. Like I read a book called The Economics of Organized Crime, and I started like writing out how this would make sense. I basically argue that she's like La Cosa Nostra, which is like a, you know, Southern Italian mafia. So it's not really like a business. It's more like a league of entrepreneurs, which is really like how one should see gangs and mafias, at least of the Sally kind. And then I like, you know, did some searching, and I found that SAL for Sally stands for like Stato Vendum Lavernum or something like that, some Italian public works document. And I argued that Sally could use these public works documents in Italy to falsify farmland to get fake farming subsidies from the Italian government, which is actually like the second largest source of revenue for a lot of Italian mafias, only behind heroin. And then I ended out the essay being like, I wrote a new poem, which was like, Sally sells seashells by the seashore. The SAL cartel compels Sally's associates to sell shells to shore sales. To dispel themselves from seashore shells, Sally sells seashells by the offshore shores. Something like that.
So I chose the one that was like, what makes odd numbers so odd, from my UChicago essay. And I just related it to like how things that we don't understand, like we tend to like remove ourselves from, and like how odd numbers are just like difficult to work with and stuff. And so I wrote about like a bunch of like things in history, like racial stuff, how things like that we generally like tend to struggle with, and like we don't like working with, we just remove ourselves from it. And so I related that to odd numbers, and I said that's why odd numbers are odd.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot.
Thank you.
I wrote a letter to an inanimate object, which actually tied in with where I'm from, Philly. So every day I would have to take the train to school, but in order to get to the train station, there was a train track that I had to cross. And this was by Taney Park. Every day was a gambit whether or not there's going to be a train there or not. And if there was a train, it would take maybe 5 extra minutes to go to the bridge, walk over the bridge, and get there. And so every day, if I saw a train on the track, I would just be distraught and have to sprint to the train station because I never allotted enough time to actually make it there without, if there's a train there. On one hand, when they built this bridge, I was very happy because it gave me the other option, but it was kind of an excuse for trains to sit there longer by having this, alternative route for pedestrians. So I was a little bit unhappy with that. And I was just trying to reflect on the way that I'm often unsatisfied with changes, even if they're for the better, and trying to reconcile with that.
I created a new music notation system since I have a background in music, and then basically did a few examples of it and talked about how exactly it works.
And what was the music notation system, and why did you create a new one?
I felt like I could maybe do a decent job. It was basically like 7 notes in it instead of being like a normal staff, so that you just have like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Uh-huh. You could like change it, so it was also based on like solfege.
Uh-huh.
So it would change based on the key that you're in. So it's more based on solfege, so it's hypothetically a more natural way of reading the music, though it would hypothetically take a large amount of adjustment if you actually wanted to use it.
If you're watching this video and thinking, I could use some help with my college application essays, consider checking out our free peer essay review and or our expert essay advising services. And like and subscribe, as they say. It will help support our channel, and we really appreciate your support here at College Fine.